Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service and jbiztechvalley.com. Mark, we have a very special guest with us, Assemblyman David Buchwald. Can I call you David over here?
Absolutely.
I know first time. David of Westchester, White Plains. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you very much for having me, Rabbi, and Mark.
It's so good. Thanks. It's so good to see you here. How it's your second term, first term?
It's the second year of my first term. I was
So
elected in November 2012.
Are you getting acclimated to this whole process? And
I'm relishing the opportunity to represent my 130,000 constituents in Westchester County.
Yeah.
I feel we've made a lot of progress on important issues, but this job every day there's something new, and trying to learn the legislative process, but also at the same time fight on behalf of my individual constituents.
But it's navigating through all the bills and the procedures and the process isn't always easy, and the protocol of what you have to say when you stand up and you debate and all this. I mean, are you getting there?
I try to be a quick study.
Okay.
I more than recognize that I'm not the master of everything, but I also know my limits and know to ask questions when there's something I'm not familiar with.
Right.
But I served in government previously. I was a member of what's called the White Plains Common Council, which is our city council in White Plains. That's just a part-time role, and just 7 members of the Common Council. But you start picking up over time. There are some elements that are consistent to any time you're in elective office, and trying to apply that perspective.
Now, you have a very wealthy district in the sense that one of your predecessors had complained to me one time that he's making the least amount of money of anyone in his district.
Well, I'm sure that's not the case, because we have plenty of people like everywhere in this state, folks who are struggling to make ends meet, who've been laid off and been without a job.
Yeah,
for
but you
quite
also
some time.
have the wealthier.
On the other hand, we also have folks who've been very fortunate and been able to produce great things here in New York. My district spans from downtown, relatively urban centers of places like White Plains and downtown Mount Kisco, to places that have great large estates. Like every district in the state, it's a diverse district, and part of this is just the fact that there's a lot of economic diversity just within the city of White Plains, let alone the other 8 towns I represent.
Maybe that's an interesting question. That you're of course a Democrat, and there's a lot of course, or majority of Democrats in the New York City, which means like the inner city, but maybe not be the whole agenda. Meaning that I would think for like Mark is saying, the richer people, they'd say, hey, get up there and cut taxes, and then you have the other Democrats probably in the city saying, hey, raise those taxes from those guys in Westchester, get more money out of them and bring programs. So how do you balance the two?
One of the things any of us who represent suburban communities have to convey when we are sent to Albany is that it's not right to paint the suburbs with a big brush of us being able to afford everything that is sent our way and sent down from Albany in terms of bills and mandates and so forth, that we really do have folks who struggle to bear the property taxes of places like Westchester County, of being able to provide for themselves and their families. I represent seniors who live on fixed incomes in subsidized housing circumstances, who were faced with 20% rent increases, and I worked on their behalf to try to make sure that wouldn't happen. That type of experience makes me completely capable of talking to my New York City colleagues about the need for housing opportunities that everyone, young and old, is able to partake in. I'm able to also provide the perspective of folks who want to make sure that transportation is available to folks, because you're going to be able to get from not just suburbs to New York City, but within the suburbs and so forth. You need to have a viable transportation network that's both mass transit on places like Metro North, but also having state roads that are up to snuff. Those sorts of things help me build bridges between upstate colleagues, suburban colleagues, and New York City colleagues, and that's part of the challenge, but role I have.
So I wanted to bring up the fact that you have at least two very famous constituents, and one of them could possibly call you up and say, look, I'm your constituent, you got to vote for the way your constituents want you to vote. The Governor Cuomo and Sandra Lee are your constituents, as well as President Bill Clinton and his wife, Hillary. You know them?
I know that all of my constituents hopefully have a sense that they're welcome to call me up and tell me their views. But obviously...
You take the call from... You don't let a staff take the call from the governor.
Well,
right? Okay.
Needless to say, it is a tremendous honor to represent the governor and the Clintons, and to know that they understand some of the views that my district faces that can be, because every district has its own idiosyncrasies, that can be important to convey. And it's a tremendous pleasure to be able to march in a parade with the governor or with Secretary Clinton, and to know that we're part and parcel of a shared community.
They got to live somewhere, so why not in your district?
Well,
right?
it's a fantastic district. I recommend it to everyone.
when you're invited to the executive chamber as an assemblyman after the state of the state or the state budget at times during the year, do you say to the governor, hello, I'm your assemblyman?
Well, I think, thankfully, the governor is very knowledgeable and knows who his assemblyman is. But also, more importantly, it means that when we have an issue affecting my neck of the woods, I don't need to feel that I have to educate the executive branch on what my district is all about. For example, we just had an issue where the electric vehicle company Tesla was being challenged as to whether they'd be able to continue selling directly to consumers here in New York State. There happen to be 3 Tesla facilities in my district, both in White Plains and Mount Kisco, of only a handful across the entire state. And the piece of legislation that was moving through earlier this year threatened to force Tesla to shut down those facilities, which would have cost jobs, not just in my district, but elsewhere in the state.
Plus, it sends the wrong message towards carbon-free vehicles.
Well, I really feel they're an environmentally innovative company, and we should give them the opportunity to succeed. That's part of what the United States is all about. Whether they are able to succeed depends on the quality of their product, but consumers will be able to make that choice, and they especially will now be able to make that choice because Governor Cuomo and Chairman Dave Gant and I were all working to see a compromise worked out, and that compromise, which is now passed in the State Assembly, will allow Tesla to maintain its facilities in places like White Plains and Mount Kisco. And I think it's the great credit of the state that we're open for business and allowing that to happen.
Now, I just want to let the audience know something about your background, because you're 35 years old. You have a Bachelor of Science in Physics from Yale. You did some antitrust economics at some other firm, and then you went back to law school and you got a law degree from Harvard.
That's right.
Harvard and Yale, no Princeton or anyway.
I'm sure there's some people who complain about that.
Oh yeah, and then you had a Master's of Public Policy at the Kennedy School of Government. And then you went to work for a firm, Paul Weiss Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. To me, that Paul Weiss Rifkin sounds like a famous law firm, like I've heard it before. Like there were other, like a governor might have been there, or someone who was there became governor. Tell me what, I didn't get a
one
chance.
of the best regarded law firms in New York City, and I had the honor of working in their tax department there, which is just a relatively small department, about 24 attorneys out of about 600 firm-wide, 500 of whom are here in New York and in New York City.
And you did some pro bono tax work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that Paul Weiss is particularly known for is a sense of public service, and part of the way lawyers are best able to do that is to provide pro bono advice to clients. So I worked with not-for-profits. I worked with individuals facing difficult tax situations and trying to work on their behalf.
Do you know how to create a not-for-profit?
Well, one of the things I certainly was involved in was helping to start up new not-for-profits. And In fact, just this past year in the state assembly, we passed a bill to revise what we then at the time called the not-for-profit corporation law in New York, now the nonprofit corporation law, that helps bring New York State into the 21st century with regards to a whole bunch of provisions for corporations.
One of the things that I'm asked all the time is, what's the difference between a not-for-profit and a non-profit?
So the answer now in New York is there is none. I mean, there really, in the end, previously was, it was just a change of names. The idea originally in New York was technically, it's not that not-for-profits can't end up getting some revenue.
No, it's
but they
within
have to,
5%.
But they have
right?
to use that revenue for the good charitable,
Right.
religious, educational work that they do. But the reality is, virtually every other state in the federal government referred to them as nonprofits, and we realized this type of New York distinction wasn't really adding that much.
So you got rid of the not-for-profit distinction. They're all
All
nonprofits
nonprofits,
now. That's
effectively.
news. That's good. I'm sure a lot of people in our audience would like to hear that.
Well, I think one of the things that I try to be able to provide to my colleagues is a little bit of a practical sense of what some of the real world implications are of various tax laws, whether it's on not-for-profits or on businesses here in New York. And I'm always willing, if a colleague comes up to me and they have a question about a bill they're drafting or about some other bill, and they say, well, what do you know about this? Might be plenty of times where I say I don't know anything, because I'm not trying to pretend that I know all there is to know, but the reality
But Harvard
is,
and Yale gives a good indication.
more importantly, 6 years of practice as a tax attorney,
Yes.
pick up a few things.
Exactly.
Heck, in a year and 4 months in the state assembly, I've learned a lot. That's part of what makes this job so enjoyable.
I mean, if they realize it, what committees are you on?
Well,
Is there a tax committee? I don't even know.
that's what I was
the
gonna-
government.
There is a tax committee. It's called the Ways and Means Committee. It's one that usually is reserved for folks as they get a little bit more senior in their time in the assembly, and that's fine. I'm sure the powers that be know that I would always be willing to serve on that
Of
committee.
course.
But I do serve on 6 committees in the state assembly. The Governmental Operations Committee that oversees about half of state agencies, the Judiciary Committee, the Election Law Committee, what's called the Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions Committee, which, in addition to overseeing business corporations, also oversees things like the Thruway Authority or the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the MTA, that runs Metro North and New York City transit system. Then I'm also on the Consumer Affairs and Protection Committee. And then
Local government.
lastly, local governments,
That's right.
which certainly shouldn't have been last, because that's the background I came from, having served on a local city council.
Now, you're also on the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, according to your website.
This is,
Why?
no, this is true, because I represent a district that over 20% of the residents are of Hispanic or Puerto Rican ancestry.
Really?
Really?
And thankfully,
That's all the White Plains area?
not just White
No?
Plains, Mount Kisco, which
Has
is
a
where my
large-
district office is, but also a whole bunch of communities, recognize, Westchester is in fact a very diverse county. And
Right.
it's not necessarily something that first leaps to people's minds when they think about Westchester, but it is part of the reality. And thankfully, the Hispanic and Puerto Rican Task Force has taken the view that it's not just whether the member themselves comes from a Hispanic or Puerto Rican background, but also whether there are members who want to pay attention to these issues because it's important to their constituents.
Now, I did a study about the Jewish Legislators Association.
Right.
And there isn't really an effective one in the legislature, because what I found out, I mean, aside from what the president says of the association says to me, is that probably 96% of the state lawmakers in the Assembly and the Senate have a Jewish footprint in their district. So if you had a meeting of the Jewish Legislators Association, there'd be 4% who would be really mad that they're not a part of this. So,
Well, my colleague Chuck Levine, who's head of the organization here in New York, who I have a lot of respect for, the reality is that the interests of the Jewish people and the interests of New York very much go hand in hand. And it is important to maintain that strong connection. And one of the things that we focus on, Assemblyman Levine, for example, will every once in a while make sure we're all aware of, for example, if something has occurred in another state that involves bias crimes or things like that, anti-Semitism.
Well, like the St. Louis massacre or whatever,
There you
the
go.
JCC. Yeah.
We want to make sure that if there are occasions for us as legislators to be on the record and make sure that folks know what's acceptable or not to New Yorkers, we have
But, you
opportunity
know,
to do so.
and before Chuck was Mark Weprin, who's now in the city council, and his brother's in the assembly.
That's right.
But, you know, they don't have bylaws. They haven't even developed bylaws yet because they don't know what it stands for. You know, because the Jewish, Judaism as a culture and ethnicity, you know, they all feel the same about Israel. But when it comes to a whole bunch of other issues, you got Dov Hikind on one side and you got Deborah Glick on the other side, and never the twain shall meet. So, you know, it's a very difficult conference to have, or caucus to have. But there's a women's caucus, there's a Italian-American legislative committee, there's the Irish Legislators Association, the Black Puerto Rican Hispanic, the Somos Conference for just the Hispanics, I guess. You know, every group, Women's Caucus, you know, every group has their own, but you see legislative events in the well of the office building, of legislative office building, where you have the Turkish Day, or you have Greek Day, or you have other types of days, but there's no Jewish. There's nothing that has to do with Jewish.
In
life
the
and
end,
culture.
so what I judge is the legislation that comes out of the state legislature consistent with Jewish values, with New Yorkers' values, with American values.
And that's
by
fine.
and large, I think it does tend to pass that threshold.
That's-
Obviously, there are other aspects
But
of
let's
what...
celebrate our culture. And I don't see anyone coming forward and saying, let's celebrate what the Jewish culture is all about. And let's show, you know, where Knishes began, or, you know, Lower East Side stuff, or whatever it might be. I mean, I would think that would be a natural, especially with the speaker being an Orthodox Jew from the Lower East Side. I mean, you know, this might be a natural, but we don't celebrate our...
Well, we do have a number of events in and around the assembly that focus on a number of
Yes.
the Jewish holidays and so forth. But
the Rebbe's
look,
birthday celebration, right, that you were at,
New
and
Year's
then
for you-
they
New
have
Year.
the Tu B'Shvat,
Yeah, New Year for trees,
Right.
always in January.
you know.
A lot of the legislation.
I mean, we were at one point, I think it was last year, we were in session during Passover, and a number of us got together to have a Passover meal, and that's part and parcel of, you know, building camaraderie with your fellow legislators. You know, the reality is, is any legislature has just sometimes, and it's true of any institution, right, not just legislatures, sometimes things are done a certain way just simply because that's the way they've been done for a while. That's never, in my mind, been a sufficient reason
Right.
for answering those things, but, you know, the reality is you try to work within the context of things sometimes as you find them. And move
Now
from there.
you're part of the new breed. You're one of the younger members of the legislature, and I would think that maybe now we could maybe move it along a little, and maybe not just do things as they've always been done, but maybe there might be a nice future, and I'll see you in 10 years, and I'll see if we've progressed in 10 years.
Well, sure. Look, obviously, and, you know, this goes really for anyone who has good ideas they want to bring to my attention. You know, being able, you know, if someone has specific ideas as to how to not just make the legislature, but in general New York State a better place, that's, you know,
Okay.
I'm always all ears.
Now I want to talk about some legislation that you had, okay?
Go ahead.
You want to permit minors to be employed as a referee, umpire, or official at a youth sporting event.
That's right.
Okay, so tell me the rationale behind it, and tell me what happened to that piece of legislation.
Sure. And there's news on that relatively recently.
Good.
This is legislation that basically recognizes that in youth sporting leagues, Little League Baseball, youth hockey leagues, and so forth, youth soccer, there are circumstances across our state where the organizers of those leagues I haven't been able to find sufficient number of adults to serve as referees or umpires and so forth. But
Adult
it can't,
meaning 18 years old.
18 years or older. And yet it's a opportunity that many youngsters, but teenagers are able to actually gain real skills in terms of being able to, with a sense of authority and so forth, oversee a sport that they really care about and contribute to their community. We have laws in New York State that allow, for example, minors in circumstances to be, newspaper delivery
Right.
folks, to be golf caddies,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And this is a piece of legislation which previously in past years had been brought up, actually, in fact, passed the state Senate 1 year. One of my predecessors in the legislature, Vanessa Gibson, who got elected recently to the City Council, carried the bill in the State Assembly. I called her up after she was elected and said, would you be interested in me trying to continue carrying this bill? And she was very gracious and encouraging me to do so. The bill is this week coming up in the Labor Committee in the State Assembly. So we have, for the first time, an indication that the State Assembly might be willing to consider
What's the
this
proposed pay?
well, the pay, that's up to...
Because it says employed, so I
Right,
just
no,
think
so it's subject to the same laws as other circumstances of employment. It's up to, obviously, the league to decide, first of all, whether they use...
Is this a law across the state? Because I'm in
Yes.
Bethlehem and Delmar, and my sons actually did participate in Little League, and there were young kids that were umpires.
Right, so
But they weren't paid
I
probably.
suspect
Maybe not,
there's
maybe.
so I suspect there are circumstances in which youngsters under 18 are indeed being hired as umpires and
Maybe
so forth.
volunteer like
But
ours,
it might
yeah.
technically not be in keeping with what New York State law allows, and we actually do understand. We do not want child labor as a general matter. Thankfully, we moved away from that about a century ago.
That's right.
Here in New York State. And New York State was one of the leaders in that
Right.
regard. But this is a fairly cabined circumstance where it actually is sort of a natural role. In fact, kids all the time play on playgrounds and have to designate one of their own to help oversee
Yeah,
the
you're not
baseball
talking about a
game or so
sweatshop,
forth.
you're talking about outdoors,
and-
you're talking about...
And it's a relatively limited sort of environment, right? Baseball league, Little League only plays for a certain number of days,
Exactly.
for a certain amount of time, and so forth. But if they're going to be engaged in that sort of activity, they should, at the very least, be under the proper procedures. And
And there's always the expression, those who can't play coach.
that does come up on
Yeah,
occasion.
Mark, you were the umpire of it.
So that's one of the things. What are some of the bills that, well, one of the things I wanted to ask you was about the committee assignments.
Sure.
When you first got into the legislature, they give you a sheet and they say, give me 5 or 6 of the committees you want to be on. Are there some committees that, like Ways and Means, that they say, these are for more senior members?
There's certainly, just the reality is there's certain committees that lots of members want to serve on.
Right.
And then there are other committees that don't have people banging down the doors to get on. And yet we have to represent all of the interests of the people across New York. And there only are a handful of committees that in the end primarily more senior members serve on. But that's fine. That's not unique to New York by any means. I think probably most large legislators have a circumstance like that. It doesn't mean, in my case, because I don't serve on the Ways and Means Committee, that I can't have an influence on tax-related
and I understand that,
legislation.
but it was like the Health Committee, Ways and Means. What are some of the committees that they might tell you that you couldn't, have on your first round as a
For
freshman?
the most part, I mean, Ways and Means is the one that most specifically, to my mind,
Right.
came to attention.
But, Health Committee doesn't usually have
Yeah, maybe
freshmen.
not. I don't recall.
Environmental Conservation, maybe?
No, environmental conservation definitely has the vast majority of committees have freshman members. And we have a freshman class this year of something approaching like 25 members, which
A lot
is
out
pretty,
of 100.
it's,
Well, you
it's
have-
large. It's one of the larger classes of freshmen.
Well, you
who
have 10
come in.
open seats.
Well, now we also have 10 open
That's
seats,
right.
but separate from that.
Separate from that, yes.
So freshmen serve
So
on the,
after November, what I'm saying is that there might be even, you'll have at least 10 new members to fill those open seats after November. And then you'll have more after that who switch, whatever, got voted out or whatever. So-
reality is, there's a part of the legislature that operates based on seniority. But,
Yes.
but that's with regards to some things, and with other things, I've really found that what most matters is the quality of the ideas you
Right.
present, our ability to talk with colleagues and to try to work through things.
Right.
One of the things that I pride myself on is not having a view that is so rigid that I'm not open to hearing of folks providing constructive ideas when it comes to my own legislation. And then conversely, I try to have a relationship with members whereby if I'm reading about their bill, say it's coming before one of the committees I serve on, and I have an idea or an observation with regards to that, I try to bring that up with that member well in advance in a collegial way. And I've found that over time, you build the respect of colleagues because you are treating them themselves with respect.
And I know that you only have a 2-year contract when the voters vote for you, but the retention rate for state legislators is probably in the 90% range of incumbency. And I was just wondering, what do you see for yourself in terms of your track now? You've done so much already in maybe the past 15 years. That what do you see for the next? I hate this question when I get interviewed and for a job interview, but what do you see for the next 15 years for your own career?
I certainly don't take anything for granted. I happen to be one of the few people who arrived in the state legislature having defeated an incumbent. So I know that that's certainly a difficult task, but is by no means an impossible task. So now that I'm on the other side of that coin and am, I suppose, an incumbent, I want to make sure the people I represent know that I don't just presume my right to continue to being reelected. I have announced that I'm running for reelection this upcoming November, but I want to get out there knocking on doors, going to train stations, doing the things that make sure people...
Okay, so given the next 15 years, let's say, looking into the crystal ball, I'm just curious. I mean, not to hold you to anything, but I'm going to have you back on within the next 10 years, and I just wanted to know how accurate we're going to be.
No, fair enough, and I appreciate the question. The reality is I know that if you had asked me...
5 years ago.
Five years ago, would I be a state assemblyman? I've said there's no way that opportunity would have presented itself.
Okay.
If you'd asked me 7 years ago, would I have been a city councilman in White Plains?
Right.
I would have said, look, I'm really interested in public policy, but I don't know whether elective politics is really the sort of thing for me. Thankfully, I really do enjoy it. I consider it a tremendous honor. But I also know, just even through my own personal history, that you can't predict sort of how either the political winds go, but also just sort of what the circumstances are going to be, in this line of work. And one of the things I'm very committed to is sort of the belief that I can't depend on elective office as a career. If I get into that mentality myself, it means I won't be as effective a legislator.
What's your part-time job? Besides being a legislator.
So,
are you still with Paul Weiss?
I am not.
Okay.
I have, in my
Private
first term, especially while I'm getting my sea legs as an assemblyman, I'm treating this effectively as a full-time job.
Okay.
The reality is that there are far more tasks to do than there are hours in the day. And, I thoroughly enjoy the job and, continue every time I'm in my district trying to fill up my calendar with events to go to, people to meet with, and so forth. I wish all of my colleagues who have other obligations the best. It's something that I'm sure with time, one can sort of master how to balance that. For now, I'm just
Well,
trying to
you're
give it
also a
my all.
newlywed, so there you go. So
That's true.
Mazel tov on that, and
That certainly kept kept me out of trouble the last few
Years,
months
yeah,
and years.
okay.
It's something that's occupied my time, but gladly so.
okay.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but like Mark says, we're going to keep tabs on you and welcome you back to see if that give you a blessing that you should proceed with your good work in New York State and representing the people of Westchester and White Plains, and continue with success and, of course, with your new family, as Mark says, and all with good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Mark.